right. Hello, everyone. This is Jason Fierno with the Mining Misfits. The Mining Misfits are a curated group of industry leaders from around the world who are passionate about making projects better and doing things more sustainable for everyone. And today, I'm really excited to talk to Rouan du Rand, from Redpath. So, Rouan, how's it going?
It's going well. And you, Jason?
Yeah, it's going great. Before we hit record, Rouan let me know that it's -40 where he's at right now. So he's trying to stay warm, I imagine. But Rouan, you're currently the Vice President of Project Management Support Services for Redpath. You want to talk a little bit about that role for me real quick, just to give our listeners an idea of what things you look at?
Sure. The role primarily entails looking after, all aspects of estimating, including the processes and systems, looking after project controls on our active job sites, and then also taking care of legal aspects, construction contracts, etc. I do have kind of, a very proactive role in the Americas, but I also play a functional role for the organization globally, looking at different systems and tools, because I think everybody pretty much understands our world is going to be very much engaged in technology in some way or another. And it's a big part of, I think, of mining's future.
Sure. Yeah, well, I'm excited to get into this with you today. For our listeners, Rouan and I have had the opportunity to do some business together. So we've got a personal and professional relationship. And what I know is that Rouan is very open-minded and wants to look at our industry and try to help us figure out how we can do things better. So I know this is a passion of yours. When people think about mining, oftentimes they think about, big open pit, huge haul trucks that are the size of a Walmart, really big operations. They think a lot less about underground, and underground is really the space that you occupy. So maybe you can give us some highlights as to the primary differences in your mind between a big open pit operation and an underground mine.
Well, I actually want to take maybe just a step back, and I've had the privilege of starting in the building industry. But if you look at buildings, civils, industrial, most of those projects are fully designed. The engineering is well known. Most of the construction is above surface, etc. So you can measure things in detail. You can price it. You can schedule it. It's I wouldn't say it's easy, but there's much more structure and standards, and they do have in some countries, they've got a standard system of measurement to quantify how the work gets executed and progressed. And every time you look at underground, I'll actually include open pit in there.
Sure.
That's probably the hardest area to under a contract to properly manage. And part of the reason why I'm saying that, I've been looking at some of the biggest claims in construction. I'll use the Boston Big Dig.
Big Dig, yeah.
Has been around underground conditions. So if you look at open pit, yes, the scale of operations is a lot bigger. And in general, the one key difference is on an open pit environment, you can have a drill that, basically you drill continuously, you hole continuously, you excavate continuously. It's whereas when you look at underground mines, you've got different levels within a mine. Sometimes you cannot work continuously. The drill needs to drill, then you need to wait for your scoop to come and muck. You need to do ground support. You work on different levels. You've got constraints in terms of power, ventilation. So there's just, if you look at the two, I think there's just significantly more factors involved in the underground operation to, whether you're pricing it or whether you're executing the work as a contractor. And I find, those are the kind of things that kind of attracts me to, the variability of underground is pretty significant.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm thinking. There's so many variables that are outside of your control. In my experience, and you know better than I do, but my experience is oftentimes, a mining company will be ready to go underground because they want to start production, but they don't know how hard the rock is or how much water is down there, how they're going to get enough ventilation. It seems like oftentimes owners are pushing contractors to go, even though they don't know, exactly what they're getting themselves into. Maybe that's a broad generalization that's unfair, but I've certainly seen it once before.
Well, it makes perfectly sense, especially if you look at the commodity cycle. It's, when the commodities are up there and you can sell gold for, let's say, 16 or 1800 dollars an ounce, then you will find some companies that would push the envelope and just get going. We'll figure out the details later. And unfortunately, it's a great idea, but it doesn't always work that well. It comes back to planning. It's don't skip the planning step, but it remains absolutely crucial. And if you get it wrong, it's just because you don't know what you're going to get underground. It's you may run up huge bills because you strike water or a condition that was just totally unexpected.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, from my vantage point, that's what I've seen, happen a couple of times, or a few times anyway. What goes into the planning piece that you must, in your mind, absolutely get right before you go underground?
I think part of the planning piece is you need to make sure that you are truly ready. Don't pull the trigger if you know that you don't have all your equipment. Your materials may still be on a boat somewhere. That's step number one. I think step number two is make sure you actually understand the scope, and that your team around you understand it. And the third part is it's the devil's in the details. When you do the planning, sit down and go through, what do I need to do tomorrow? Do I have everything to execute it? What do we need in a week's time? What do we need in 3 weeks? And it sounds such a simple concept, but unfortunately, it doesn't happen at a lot of mine sites. It's because people are very short-sighted.
Yeah, one of my mentors used to say, ready, fire, aim.
Yeah, and it's because, you just focus on the meters that we need to get today or tomorrow, and not focused on, over a period of a month or a quarter. There may be a much larger goal. And also, just while we're on the meters, it's not just about getting meters, it's getting the right meters, which is critical for any mine to start up on time, get to the ore, as planned.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, despite the complexities of underground mining, you still like it. So what is it about this space that you enjoy, one, and then, what are some of the opportunities within the space that you see?
So what I enjoy, and I think Forrest Gump coined it, life is like a box of chocolates. It's you never know what you're going to get, and that's truly mining. It's every day is different. What I truly enjoy is the people. It's you get all sorts of different people from a global perspective. I'm privileged to experience different cultures, the diversity in the workforce, the different operational methodologies, and also where I'm at, it's having exposure to sinking shafts, whether it's a simple straight sink and line or something more complex where you put in highly technical steel liners through to mine development, mine operations, raise boring. So for me, it's exposed to the absolute full gambit.
Sure, makes sense.
And when you deal with, especially globally, you deal with the different clients, different people. What I really like is there's not one specific solution that works in all cases. It's you have to look at who's the client, the geographical difference, the cultures. So you may have 2 or 3 different solutions for the same problem. It just depends on where you are. So in terms of opportunities, I think there's still, I think, a lot of opportunity for number one, professionals like you and I in the commercial space to really help the operation side of our business to understand how we can work better together to get underground mines quicker in production. And you'll hear, I'll talk a lot about relationships. It's how do we convert contracts that are very transactional in nature to using relationships to solve problems, but in a way that, both parties to a contract, get what they need out of that contract.
Yeah, I agree with that. Let's dive into that a little bit. What are some of the things you believe as an industry we can do to get better at building relationships and, understanding what each side needs to get out of the arrangement? What are some of the things that you think we could be doing there to improve?
Well, I think, one of the key areas that, I think of is earlier contractor owner engagement. And when I say earlier, right from the pre-feasibility stage, is to look at, what is the mine design, the mining method, how do we access the ore body, how do we do it, not the cheapest, how do we do it cost effective, how do we meet the schedule targets. And traditionally contractors are, not too keen on always jumping in and helping because, you can share a ton of ideas throughout that process just to get to the end of the feasibility stage where all your ideas get packaged up into a tender document and you effectively tender against yourself. So I think from an industry perspective, I think forming partnerships there's a lot of value in it. I do believe other areas that we can look at is, strangely enough, the mining industry doesn't have any standards in terms of how to compile tender documents. So when people price, everybody price the way that they think they should be, all the way that the pricing schedules are compiled. But the one contractor can put all these time-based costs into the unit rates and the other one can kind of separate it. So it creates a huge challenge for clients when they get pricing. It's how do you evaluate the pricing? Is it cost effective? Or are you looking at somebody who lowballed the pricing just to get the job? So I think, working on standards to guide contractors on how to price documents, I think is a big part. Then, and I spoke about relationships. It's mining contracts are really not, we don't contract for 6 months or a year. It's very often it's 2, 3, 5 to 10 years. In my environment, we've had sites where we've been there 16 to 17 years. We've on one site been there for 35 or 36 years. And what you realize is, you can make a contract very transactional, but all you end up, it becomes adversarial because people get stuck in the details. And somehow we've got to focus on these relationships for partners, because you can have a contract with wording that says, you need to do X and Y, but it doesn't solve the problem. It's people need to sit around the table and say, look, I know what the contract said that was negotiated 5 years ago, but that kind of, it really makes it difficult to solve problems that was never anticipated by the contract. Other things that we absolutely have to look at, and this is a mining industry, it's not a problem. I think it's a real challenge. We really got to focus on how do we increase productivity. I've seen in the 1970s and 80s an all-take shaft sinking where the guys were sinking at, 5, 6, maybe even 7 meters a day. Yes, there were a lot of safety incidents, etc.
Sure.
But through everything that we've added, we're down to between 2 and 3 meters a day if we're lucky, and then we describe it as a good day. So, and that concept as a whole, I think transition throughout or reverberates throughout mining. And we really have to think about how do we use things like planning, technology to increase our productivity, but doing it in a way that we don't injure people.
What would you say in your mind, if I could ask a question on that, because I think it's really interesting. Like you said, the 70s and 80s, you get 5-6 meters a day on a sink, and now it's 2 to 3. In your mind, in your professional opinion, what are the primary factors associated with that? Because that's pretty bad.
I think, this is just my opinion. So I think the mining industry realized that we need to work a lot safer. And in order to work a lot safer, a lot of things were slowed down to a large extent to make sure that, we do the risk assessments, we do the hazard analysis, we do everything that we need to do. And we need better processes and formal structures. And we did all of those things, but it came at sacrificing productivity. We did not really truly invest in new technologies. We did not truly invest in measuring our plan versus actual. What's going wrong? How do we fix it? And I think if you take those two factors alone, you probably solve, in my mind, 70 or 80% of that puzzle. It's the older generation, just especially the 70s and 80s, they just had the mentality of, no matter what, we're going to make it work. Labor legislation was a lot easier. It's countries like South Africa, you could work on a basis where if I achieve my meters for the day and I do it in 6 hours, I've completed my shift, and you'll call out the next shift an hour before and they'll take over. So people weren't as much stuck to rigid working hours. But that's just my opinion, but I don't think I'm too far off the mark.
No, I mean, you've been there, done that, seen it. So unless you had your eyes closed and you weren't listening, which I know you weren't. So yeah, no, I think that's the planning piece is a big one. Obviously, safety. I think we can all get behind the fact that we want everybody to be safe and return home to their families every day. I don't think anybody feels differently about that. If they do, then I hope they leave our industry and go somewhere else, because I don't want them. But the planning piece, I understand that. And it's kind of a head scratcher though, like why? Like, what's the why behind not wanting to put pen to paper and actually think about what you're going to do before you do it? It seems trivial, but I'm agreeing with you because I see it too. I see a huge lack of planning when I talk about projects in general, not just underground.
I can, this is just the last 2 years. I've seen projects where you bid the project competitively. So you try and you sharpen the pencil and you only put the minimum people you think is going to take to run the job. And I mean, you plan for success, but but I've seen what clients do is, afterwards, then they bring in consultants because, performance isn't where they expect it to be. But they pay an extraordinary premium for the external consultants to analyze your data and work with you every day to improve your efficiencies and your processes and all of that. Yes, does it make a difference? Absolutely. I'm a true believer in it, but I think the mistake there is really right at the procurement stage. It's not, and I'll speak as a contractor, it's not that we don't know what we want to do, but if we put in all the people that we really think is going to make a difference, it's likely not going to be the lowest price. It's going to be the best schedule. But if people are looking at lowest price, then you're not in the game. And unfortunately, a lot of people look at lowest price. So it's just it's one of those things. How do the industry recognize that it's not about the lowest price at the end of stage, it's about the lowest cost, and how do we get that? What do we need? Kind of touches on earlier contractor engagement, get the right ideas, the right methods right from the get-go, and have honest conversations around what does planning really take. It's the old school will say, well, it's one site engineer and that's it. And if you've got a complex job, it actually sometimes takes a little bit more effort, more people to truly do that next day, next week, 3 weeks out. Engage with your procurement group, make sure you've got all the materials, the inventory, make sure the logistics are sorted out. and make sure to actually communicate to the guys going underground exactly what they need to do and measure them. When they come out the day, next day you compare and say, look, this is what we all agreed that needs to be done, and this is what we've ended up doing. So anyways, just my own views on that topic.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. I mean, I when I think about some of the supply chain activities that take place in a tender process, far too often it seems that you're right. Price, everybody's looking at price, everybody's looking at price. And that's kind of been in my experience, over the course of the last 10, 15, maybe even 20 years that we've focused more on that price side. It seems though that most of us know now that doesn't work, yet it doesn't seem to be getting any better, but that's my perception. So I'm asking you, from the lens of a contractor who, responds to requests for proposals from owners, do you see, what do you see there? What are the trends that you see there? Is there change? Is there not? Is it better? Is it worse? Is it that certain owners do it a certain way and you gravitate toward them, and others, you stay away from? How do you view that?
It maybe goes back to a couple of years ago, with all the projects having big budget blowouts, there were a lot more governance put in place, and there was a definite separation where procurement groups operated on their own and operational groups, focused on operations. So when you put out a tender or a bid, there really wasn't any particular conversations or communications between those groups. And even when you tender, you can only talk to the procurement people. And I do think that's where we start missing the boat, in the sense that it's operations people that execute the job. They are a vital part of the equation. And I think separating cost or not letting them see what things cost sometimes is I think we're making a mistake. Because they will sometimes explain to you that yes, it does cost a little bit more money, but this is why we do it. These are the reasons. And the last 5 or 6 years definitely see and I would call it a disruption, where the procurement groups, they try to do the right thing, and it's a great idea, but it destroyed relationships. It doesn't get the best ideas through because everything is focused on price, and we've got to focus on how do we rebuild those relationships. How do we truly validate that the technical solution is the right solution? And price, I know it's important, but it shouldn't be the first factor. It should maybe be the fourth or the fifth that you bring in when you do an evaluation and select a contractor.
Yeah, no, I hear you. It to tell you the truth, it's maybe one of the reasons that I'm bald, because it stresses me out and pisses me off so bad that we think that we can beat contractors into submission down to the lowest possible price, and that somehow that's good value for the business. It drives me absolutely insane. No question about it. So I definitely understand. Well, what do you, with that, the flip side of that coin, that doesn't work. We know that doesn't work. What does work? So early engagement, I get that. And you wouldn't be the first to say that. And I agree with you that it's good to have those conversations early. I mean, you don't want to give away your Coke recipe, but I think there is a lot of value in having conversation up front. But what are some of the things that you're seeing within the industry that do work, or in your experience have worked?
I think the very first thing is being open, honest, transparent. If something doesn't work, don't try and sugarcoat it. That for me is the foundation of what needs to happen. And part of that honesty and truth is when you build schedules and budgets and those kind of things, make sure it's accurate and it reflects that honesty. The second part to it is, and it goes back to the late 80s, 90s, mining houses used to have their own in-house engineering groups and procurement groups, etc. And they decided, well, let's get rid of all of these people. We'll use external companies to manage that function for us. will focus on just operating the mine. And unfortunately, I think what has happened over time, those middle groups just started growing bigger and bigger and bigger. And you end up where there's lots and lots of people on a job site. And the first thing that you see is it's the contractor's got his management people, the middle layer's got their equivalent management people, and the client's got the same management people. So you're triplicating resources. And you end up having people focusing on just, what do I need to do to justify my job? And it doesn't add any value to the boots on the ground. And it's really, I think smaller teams, I guess is what I want to say. It's we really need to focus on smaller teams when clients and contractors engage, try and figure out, who's got the best of the best and make use of it. Don't just duplicate for the sense of duplicating, and or to some extent, it's to expand the scope of a contractor, that they do take care of more of the project. And unfortunately, you do sometimes find bad contractors, and even good contractors sometimes screw up. But the good contractors, generally, the more we've got under our command and control, the easier it is for us really to execute and to figure out when things are going wrong, why it's going wrong. We've got the detail. We've got to plan the job. So I think a big part of project is of projects going wrong is just the teams are too big, too many people, not adding value, and a lot of it goes into indirects. I think from the 2000s till 2020, I read an article, I can't remember where, and somebody did some stats, and it was amazing to see how indirects have grown by orders of magnitude. And we're still blowing budgets, we're still blowing schedules. So I think, to me, the solution is owner and contractor. They really need to have a much tighter working relationship, utilize, figure out, who's got the strengths and specific areas, rely on it. Make your contractor accountable for the scope that they're executing. And if you do need to use middlemen, the same, if that middle organization is really strong in engineering, maybe that's what they need to focus on. It's design, get the designs correct, get the specs correct, but let the contractor execute. Let the contractor do the construction management. Let the contractor please explain if they're not meeting schedules, etc., and do that right in front of the client. Unfortunately, I've seen instances where, because you've got this three tiers or three layers, it's the narrative from the contractor gets modified in the middle to go to the client, because the middle piece maybe have different incentives or different KPIs that drive behavior. And I'm not saying the middle piece is not needed. I think on some jobs there's a definite role and function, but we got to get the team smaller.
Okay, it makes sense. Less duplication. Yeah, sure. With that, I'm curious. You brought up incentives, you brought up KPI, you brought up behavior. This is a topic that I converse with people about all the time, because everybody's got their own opinion about what works and what doesn't work. But for you and Redpath, what are some of the incentive schemes or programs you've seen that work really well from your perspective?
Well, that's a good question, because there are quite a number of different schemes. But I think the first thing is keep the first sort of major item is keep that scheme very, very simple. I've seen KPI schemes where they measure 10 KPIs. The reality is, break it down into 2, maybe 3. If you want to measure productivity and schedule and for instance quality, they all tend to go together. So pick one. If you want to measure production, have a single simple metric. Make sure that it's actually achievable. I've seen too many schemes where the clients are driven by promises to their shareholders, where there's targets out there that everybody knows will never be met. So having that incentive scheme really doesn't incentivize anyone. So keep it simple. You know, I normally just look at productivity and look at quality. Safety is a touchy subject, because some people say, well, safety needs to be inherently part of our operation. I think it does make a difference if you do put it in the KPIs and everybody is focused on it continuously, constantly. The other part to the incentive scheme is for me, there's two components. The one is on the corporate level, where the company wants to make more profit. And then there's the people. And the people component needs to filter through to everybody on the team to make a success of it. And that's really my view of KPIs. You keep it simple, keep it measurable, make it achievable, and make sure that everybody shares in those incentives. Those are the ones that work, and they work really well. The ones where it's complex and too many carve-outs just doesn't work.
It dilutes it. Yeah, dilutes focus. No, I get it. I think a piece that you said that I want to call out as well is flowing down the benefit, not only to the company, to the contractor corporation, but to the people, because let's be honest, people are the ones that build projects. People are the one that sink shafts. So I agree with you. How do you go about looking at that? Is it based on, you know, or what are some of the best practices you would say Redpath puts in place to make sure, you know, there's a flow down of the incentive down to the people?
I think it's a simple mechanism of looking at, you know, what are the milestones, make sure it gets communicated to the people, and then drive it down based on, you know, at this point in time, we still do it on your level within the organization, which in theory should be an indicator of your impact that you have on the overall team or the construction effort. But to structure it, so if you get $100 and you do have 10 people, it doesn't mean everybody gets $10. It may mean, you know, one person gets $12 or $13. So let's say a jumbo driller maybe gets $13. The nipper may get $8 or $7. So you try and structure it around their contribution to making that operation a success. But it's also not just about the direct people underground. It's also, you know, the engineers helping with the planning, the schedulers, you know, make sure they're part of the team and reward them accordingly.
No, thanks for that. I agree with you. The incentives that I've seen that work really well are the ones that flow down to the staff in a meaningful way. There's things that I've seen backfire in that space too, but in a large part, you know, it really does make a big difference. Absolutely makes a big difference. Okay, cool. Well, so Rouan, what advice, you know, as we evolve as an industry, there's a group of individuals that are starting to, you know, hang their boots up, they're retiring, they're moving on to other things, either retiring or consulting or playing golf. And then there's this gap where there's not a lot of talent based on commodity cycles, not a lot of people. I don't mean to say that people aren't good, but there's just not a lot. So we've got new folks coming into the industry, and we're trying to attract new folks into the industry. What would be some advice that you would give, having spent, you know, your career in this space? What would be some advice you would give to the next generations who want to get into mining, or what would you tell them so that they would get into mining?
So the one thing, and it's maybe a pet peeve that I have, it's mining isn't a dirty business. You know, the media portrays it as it's dangerous, it's dirty. No, it's not. It's, you know, I think if I look at a lot of contractors, mining companies, they truly care about the people. They do care about the environment. Do we get it right all the time? Probably not. But I take my hat off to the contractors and the companies that I've seen. In mining, you don't have to be a mining engineer to get into mining. It really takes a whole diverse group of people, from professionals right through to people washing coveralls, etc. So it is really, you can come from a different industry and you can find a spot in mining. I think what some people also just need to realize, it's, when you enter the mining industry, it's generally better, start at the entry level, pay your dues, learn the trade. It does take time, but be a sponge, take it all up. And after many years, you'll actually start seeing the benefit. I've learned, it's an industry that, as much as every day is a new opportunity. Learn something different. It's even on contract. You get into meetings where somebody say something and you think, well, I never really thought about it.
Yeah.
For me, it's also listen to the older people. They may have their likes, dislikes, and preferences, but pay attention to how they do things and why they do things, because it didn't happen by accident. It actually happened. They do things because they've done so many things wrong that this is the better way to look at it. And especially for the young folks, unfortunately I find a lot of them that they expect, because they're in mining, they need to get paid top dollar. And for me, it's no, you don't deserve it. You've got to earn it, and you've got to start at the bottom. You've got to work your way up. You've got to eventually show that you make a difference. You're worth it. And if you're good at what you do, mining is rewarding. It truly is a rewarding business.
I think that's great advice. I know, speaking from my own personal experience, the first 5 to 10 years I was in this business, all I did was carry bags and sponge. But it really serves me well. And others that do this have done the same. I see that it really serves them well, because they've got the foundation that they need to build on. So I think that's really great advice. Yeah, no, I think that's really good advice. Okay, so I'm going to ask you a question that I ask, all of our guests, Rouan, and it's a two-part question, which is, where do you want the industry to be in 10 years? And where do you think it's going to be? And you can take that in whichever order you prefer, but I'd like to get your thoughts on both perspectives.
Yeah, so from my perspective, I've mentioned a couple of items. The one is, definitely want to see much leaner project teams. I think leaner teams, people just work better together. Better communication, etc. I truly want to see that clients do invest in longer term partnerships, not just with contractors, with suppliers. I think with technology where it's at the moment, the next 10 years is going to be a very significant change in how we as mining people use technology. And I think those long-term partnerships are absolutely vital to the mix. I do want to see, speaking about equipment automation, do want to see significantly higher levels of equipment automation. I'm sometimes a little cautious, saying battery operated equipment. It's my question about batteries as well. If the batteries are finished, where do they go? So we've got to find clean energies and clean ways of developing mines. And I would really like to see mining 10 years from now to be recognized as a leader in environmental and social. I mean, there's a big drive on ESG at the moment, but I think mining companies for many years, we've gotten really a bad rap for not truly focusing on these aspects. So I do think it's worthwhile. We need to pay hard attention to it. We need to measure it. We need to report out on it, because there's a lot of good things that we do. So I guess that's where I want the industry to be. Where the industry will likely be, in actual fact, is, I think the one that I definitely see, the equipment automation is coming. Technology is coming. That's definitely one of the things that are out there. I do think that after many years, the partnership concept will take hold in some of the bigger mining companies. They do realize it. It just takes 5 to 10 years for that idea to kind of, take a foothold and to figure out what does it really mean. So I definitely think that's going to happen. And I'd like to say leaner project teams, but I'm not yet convinced that people understand that smaller teams are more effective.
Yeah, it's right sizing it, right? Taking out that middle layer and all that additional integration that's required. That can definitely make you inefficient.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
But it's always the challenge is how do you calculate it so that you can show people, this is the large big model, this is a much leaner model. So that's the one challenge. And the other thing, I didn't mention it. It's taken mining quite a long time for project management really to get hold and to infiltrate mining construction as such. And even up until, I would say, 2020, I think mining is still significantly behind the 8 ball when it comes to project management. It's we need to invest and train our mid-level managers. What is project management all about? How do you apply it? And there's definitely lessons that we can learn from other industries.
You're right. There needs to be more development, more training, more knowledge transfer, to the lower ranks, the newer ranks within the industry. It's just, I don't see it happening. Flat out, I don't see it happening. At least not universally or even the majority.
Yeah, I think one of the missing pieces, in my view, is people don't take a hard look at what am I doing? Does it add value? They just keep doing the things just because the guy before me did it and the guy before him did it. And for me, we've got to take a hard look at, does it add value? It's, I've mentioned indirects increasing, project meetings are there's a million of them, and every time I walk out of a meeting, said, well, did we do anything specifically that drove productivity or production or boots on the ground? And if the answer is no, it's half the time I'd say, well, this meeting was a waste of time. And one's got to keep the focus, got to be on what do we need to do to progress this project as efficiently as possible.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. Especially in large corporations, it seems like it's just death by PowerPoint. You have a meeting to have a pre-meeting to a meeting to a meeting, when you could have just done it in one whack with typically half the people. So I definitely agree with you on that. Well, is there anything else as we wrap up? Is there anything that I didn't ask you that you wanted to tell our listeners, or anything on your mind that is kind of a final thought?
Not for me. It's just, I think the key thing is it's be honest, be open. I know that George Flummerfeld will normally say, it doesn't matter how bad the facts are. You've got to look at them. You've got to understand them in order to do something about it. And for me, it's, if we can link the two, having people that are open-minded and honest and look at the hard facts, then I think we can make changes pretty quickly. And will all of them work? Probably not. We may need to go through a 2 or 3 year cycle where some things are going to work great, some going to be mediocre, and some will have to go back to the drawing board and just say, look, it's a great idea, but it doesn't work. What do we need to change?
Yeah, I totally agree. I absolutely fundamentally agree with that 100%. Well, Rouan, I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with us and impart your knowledge, to this great industry. For people that want to know more, want to be able to reach out to you, connect with you, what's the best way for people to track you down?
I think the best way is generally just on LinkedIn as one part, but they're also welcome to track me down at Redpath. It's in my email address. It's basically in my name surname at redpathmining.com.
Okay, perfect. And we'll make sure we link that up in the show notes as well. So Rouan, really appreciate you taking the time, like I said, and thanks for being here with us today.
Thank you. Appreciate it.